Very briefly today, let's look at how you go about taking a thesis statement, checking to make sure that it has all of its necessary parts, and then creating a full sentence outline for your essay. You're accustomed to making very brief outlines for an essay, probably an essay test, where you just list in 1 or 2, 3 words each of the points that you want to make in finishing your essay. Particularly when you're taking an essay test, that's all the time you have in order to do your pre-planning. But when you're writing a longer paper, as you will for this class and other college classes, it's important that you get used to making full sentence outlines. And the reason for that is first because you want to make sure that you stick to your topic throughout the entire essay, and not just the topic, but the part of the topic of the thesis that you have to prove. And so when you make a full sentence outline, then you can write your long essay paragraph by paragraph and be confident that in the end your essay will have hung together with each of the steps along the way and taken you in the end to the place you wanted to go in the beginning. So first let's start with a sample thesis statement. Suppose we're going to write about the paper Making Maple Syrup made from the sap of the sugar maple tree involves a process that has a number of steps. And I've already read and I know that the steps include the sap has to be gathered from the trees and it has to be transported to the sugar house and then it has to be boiled before it's finally ready for distribution. So that's what I know going into this, but it isn't in my outline yet. So we can tell from the attitude part, or the part that has to be proven about the topic making maple syrup, is that it involves a process that has a number of steps. So this is a steps and a process essay this time. And that means that we know that we'll have at least as many paragraphs in the body of the essay as we have the number of steps. So if I had 17 steps, I would know that I would have at least 17 paragraphs in this essay. As it happens, I don't know a lot about making sap from sugar maple trees, so I probably will not have quite that level of detail in this essay. And realistically, when you write essays for this class, you have to choose thesis statements that are narrow enough in focus that you can complete the essay in the amount of time and space that is realistic for the time that you're given. So let's assume we're going to flesh out a full sentence outline. Well, we know that the first step is, as I mentioned earlier, first the sap has to be gathered from the trees. Notice that's a full sentence. It just doesn't say gather sap. It's a full sentence outline. So then in order to gather the sap from the trees, the questions occur to me that I would have to have answered in order to fully understand this process. And one might be, how do you select your trees? So detail number 1 under step 1 would be trees that I would choose. And I happen to know that you would definitely choose healthy trees that are sugar maple trees and that they are wide enough around, big enough that you can adequately gather an amount of sap. And in what I read, that turns out to be about 30 centimeters around. So my detail number 1 in full sentence form might be, first select healthy sugar maple trees at least 30 centimeters in diameter, period. That's a complete sentence in support of our topic sentence about the sap has to be gathered. Then I would have to go into detail number 2, which, as I think this essay through in my head, has to be, yeah, so how do you tap the tree? What do you need to do? And I've read that the next step is that you bore a hole in the tree and you bore it to a certain depth and you bore it at such an angle that the sap will drip down. You'd be a little bit embarrassed if you drilled your angle down into the tree so that the sap had to run up in order to be collected in the bucket. So detail number 2 would be something like bore a hole about 3 centimeters deep into the side of the tree at such an angle that the sap can run down into a bucket. That's a complete sentence detail under our topic sentence about gathering the sap from the trees. And there may be a detail 3 or 4 or 5 or however many details you've discovered or you plan to include. And then that paragraph is fleshed out in a full sentence outline. So then we would move down on to the second step in this process, which turns out to be the collected sap. Oh, I forgot to put a bucket on the tap, didn't I, to collect the sap as it drained down. So I might have to go back and add a final detail under the first step before I go on to the second step, which is the sap then has to be transported to the sugar house once it's been collected in the buckets. So how do you transport sap? Well, maybe it takes a particular kind of container. I don't know. But if it did, the first detail would be choose the appropriate brown jug. That's probably not true, but choose the appropriate container to transport the sap. Detail number 2 would be something about the vehicle maybe that you would use to transport to the sugar house, and so forth and so forth. Then we're ready, incomplete sentences again, and then we're ready to move down to topic number 3, which turns out that the sap is boiled for a certain number of hours. Probably the number of hours would be written in your topic sentence. So detail number 1 would be something about how do you boil the sap. The first step might be you put it in an iron pot or whatever kind of a stainless steel container or whatever in order to do the boiling. The detail number 2 might be what kind of a temperature do you need to boil sap, and that would be written out in a complete sentence form. And the third detail might be for how long you have to boil the sap. And so our third detail would be the sap is boiled for a minimum of 3 hours, say, or whatever. And then any additional details in full sentence form it takes to complete the paragraph about the sap being boiled. And then you would move on to step number 4. And when you're finished, if there may be more steps, 5, 6, 7, when you've finished explaining your steps, then you would write the topic sentence for your summary paragraph. Now, your summary paragraph isn't a step. It's an opportunity to wrap everything up, to take the reader back and remind them of the reason that they've been reading the essay. So my summary might begin with a summary phrase like in conclusion or in summary, or to summarize making maple syrup, 3 steps or 7 steps were required. Now you don't need to write your summary paragraph as a part of your outline, but if you know the topic sentence for it, in the outline you will be sure to remember to write the summary paragraph as well. The next step, of course, is to go ahead and fully develop the essay, write it out in this order, focusing on each paragraph at a time, and making the paragraphs read more smoothly by adding transitional words and phrases and connecting the parts along the way. You will then have, this is my summary, you will then have developed a complete essay about making maple syrup